Welcome to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Carol Massar.
And I'm Jason Kelly. We're here inside Bloomberg headquarters in New York.
This week, Turkey launches a major offensive in Syria, and President Trump says the United States will not stand in the way. The surprise announcement heard around the world, and the not-so-surprising winner in all of this.
Plus, vaping closer to home, how Joule took on big tobacco and is now caught in the middle of a huge public health crisis.
And Aramco's mega IPO, it is finally set to go.
More of that ahead, but first, here's editor Joel Weber on this week's issue and the cover story, Tesla and the complicated ethics of autopilot.
That's right. So we all like the idea of driverless cars. It seems like the future, right? But how do we get there? And basically, Tesla's in the middle of this grand experiment with autopilot, which is viewed as a stepping stone to driverless cars. But there's this big ethical dilemma. Basically, this cover story is an ethics course of how do we get there. And Tesla's already doing this in real time with autopilot, and other companies have not been quite as bold as what Tesla has chosen to do.
Well, Joel, the dilemma is, right, the more miles we get on the road with something, the better, right? There's so much data involved in making this better.
Get the data.
In the interim, you're going to lose some lives, unfortunately.
That's right. And that's the moral calculus that we're all living in right now, because somebody hits autopilot, that car is next to you, you're actually on the roads with them. There's no real federal oversight. You know, think about drugs, right? There's clinical trials and everything. There's no same safety mechanism in place for our transportation departments. So this is out there already in real time. Because of that, our estimate is that it's past 1.5 billion miles already that Tesla's been able to acquire.
It's a lot.
A lot, right? So we don't know what they've learned from that. We don't know how safe it is, but we're all living in this world now.
Well, and there is a connection between this story and the story we've already mentioned around vaping and Joule. These are two companies, Joule and Tesla, in very different markets, who are essentially taking a similar approach to let's get there, let's get out there and figure it out.
It's Silicon Valley.
Right.
Move as fast as you can. Sometimes you break things, sometimes it costs a few lives. The Tesla question is really like, maybe autopilot's worth it.
Right.
Right? Like, a couple people die, but like, could this actually dramatically save millions of lives in the same way that maybe like a penicillin once did?
It's like the ultimate question within kind of the world of consumer products. Like, what's the safety level? What is it that people are willing to deal with in order to kind of get to an autopilot world?
That's right. So it's actually a story that's been hidden in plain sight for a while, and yet we didn't see anybody wrestling with the ethical dilemma, and that's what Zach did so well and why we made it the cover story.
Part of this story, ethics aside, is something of a lifestyle story in some ways. You know, we picture this world where we're able to sit back, read a book, or maybe have a cup of coffee. And that brings us to the debrief this week. On a lighter note, you sat down with Andrea Ely. He is a connoisseur and an entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. So if you know anything about coffee, Ely is one of those brands that is really, it just means coffee and quality. So we talked to him at our Good Business Festival in London that we did a couple weeks ago. The thing that I thought was profound is, like, this is a third generation company. You think coffee's a crowded market, right? Like, think about all the different coffee companies. So how does somebody like Andrea Ely distinguish his brand and sort of think about future-proofing it? Because coffee is ultimately a commodity, right? And climate change is really going to have profound impacts on that industry.
Joel Weber, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
The editor of the magazine. Well, turning to a top story this week, Turkish troops crossing into northeastern Syria to force U.S.-backed Kurdish militants controlling the border area away from the region.
And President Trump saying the U.S. won't stand in Turkey's way. Dozens of U.S. troops working with the Kurds were pulled back earlier this week.
That's right. And that announcement took a lot of folks in Washington and around the world by surprise, as it impacts the United States' relationship with other countries, none more so than Russia. Here's reporter Henry Meyer in Moscow on Advantage Putin.
Russia has been looking to restore the influence it had in the Middle East, which was very strong during the Soviet era. That changed dramatically after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And really, President Putin has had immense success in this field. The intervention that Russia did in Syria starting a few years ago, in which they succeeded in reversing the outcome of the civil war. President Assad was on the verge of being overthrown, and he's now firmly in power. This has been a great success, but what is happening now is that the US withdrawal from Syria is providing Russia an opportunity to really cement that situation in Syria.
But it's not just about Syria. I think you're right that Russia has since filled the vacuum from Syria to Libya, even luring Turkey into buying some military equipment. I mean, it's a much broader impact here, potentially, right, for Russia.
That's right. I mean, Syria, if you like, has been Russia's calling card in the Middle East. It's the reason why it's taken seriously now. But it's using that to expand its role in many other countries. In Libya, there are increasing reports that Russia is backing the strongman in the east, General Haftar. And it is developing relationships with traditional U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia. President Putin is due to visit Saudi Arabia shortly. You mentioned Turkey. That's very important. The decision by Turkey to defy U.S. pressure and to go ahead with buying the S-400 missile defense system, it could be a turning point, actually, for that country's relationship with the West and with Russia.
What's interesting, too, and I find, in your story, and I think we're all kind of getting up to speed. We know what's been going on in Syria, but just kind of how all the complicated relationships. But you do talk about someone who used to have a relationship within the Trump administration, Trump's former envoy for combating the Islamic State, Brett McCurk. And he tweeted out, right, bottom line, Trump tonight, after one call with a foreign leader, provided a gift to Russia, Iran, and ISIS. I mean, so this is somebody who worked within the Trump administration, really being very critical of this move by the president.
Well, he's not the only one. I mean,
Welcome back to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Jason Kelly.
And I'm Carol Massar. Join us for Bloomberg BusinessWeek every day on the radio, starting at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. You can also catch up on our daily show by listening to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at Bloomberg.com.
And of course, you can find us online at businessweek.com and through our mobile app.
Turning now to teen vaping. This week, school districts across the U.S. sued Joule in federal courts.
And Walgreens and Kroger also announced that they will stop selling e-cigarettes, making them the latest retailers to take action in the wake of the outbreak of vaping-related injuries.
And Jason, those injuries have not been directly linked to Joule, but the company is caught in the middle. Here's this week's BusinessWeek explainer on how Joule took on big tobacco. Joule hit the market with its fruit-flavored nicotine in 2015. Not long afterward, it was being called the iPhone of e-cigarettes, the Keurig of vaping. The company had a valuation of $38 billion, and co-founders Adam Bowen and James Monsees were billionaires. They weren't disrupting just any market, they were taking on big tobacco. It was a huge problem to solve. There are 1 billion smokers worldwide, and cigarettes still cause about 500,000 deaths in America every year. Bowen said that in 50 years, no one would be smoking cigarettes. But now the question is, will they be using Joule instead? The company has found itself in the midst of a huge public health controversy. Joule's accused of hooking an entire new generation of high school students on nicotine. It's now the target of a criminal investigation, a congressional probe, and an FDA inquiry. And in a touch of irony, the company that set out to take down the tobacco companies has a new CEO who came from the maker of Marlboro cigarettes. Joule is the subject of one of this week's feature stories, specifically looking at how the e-cigarette maker is like so many esteemed Silicon Valley startups.
It's a great read. Here's reporter Lauren Etter in LA.
Like many other Silicon Valley companies, this one started at Stanford University. The two founders of the company were graduate students studying at the business school, and they were smokers. And they were sharing smokes out back and decided that, wow, this is a very outmoded product and maybe we can innovate on this. So that's what they set out to do. They did a lot of research. They launched their very first version of an e-cigarette at a time when there wasn't too much competition on the market. So they basically innovated in the cigarette space and launched what became the most popular e-cigarette in the world.
All right, but it wasn't so easy, right? Because at first I think the initial device maybe didn't work so well. It was hard getting investor money too, initially.
Yeah. It's interesting because at the time when they were seeking money, this is circa 2005 to 2010, when they were really they had their prototype, they want to start launching it, and they kind of got the cold shoulder from Silicon Valley investors originally. The tobacco industry is kind of considered to be one of the sin industries, and Silicon Valley really kind of shunned those sin industries. So they originally had a very tough time getting some funding, but that all changed, of course, a little bit later down the road.
And what changed it? I mean, obviously part of it was positioning, because they got people on board with this idea of no, this is actually an antidote in a way to what was already considered then a public health crisis.
Exactly. So multiple things happened, but really cigarettes it was very clear that cigarettes were going to be a dying industry. Fewer people every year were smoking, 3% declines year over year. And everybody was starting to turn away from cigarettes. But of course, they're addicted. They are addicted to the nicotine. So that's sort of what the company founders really zeroed in on. We can allow smokers to continue to have a nicotine fix, but it's not going to have the combustion that causes the tar in the lungs and is ultimately the cause of lung cancer. So they kind of positioned it almost as a more healthful product, as a healthful alternative to cigarettes. And it started catching on. But the second thing was really, it's a very addictive product. They invented something called a nicotine salt vape liquid. And basically they had chemists early on in their laboratories, and they devised this ultra powerful nicotine liquid. And that for sure helped get a lot of people hooked onto their product.
Well, and I think what is so troubling is how did so many teenagers, right, those underage, get hooked on a product like Joule?
Well, this is the thorniest issue regarding Joule. But the fact of the matter is, early on, Joule laid out a marketing campaign that was pretty much designed to attract kids. It was super edgy, it had colorful graphics, really bold. They hired models. It just made it look like a very cool product. They marketed on Instagram, and sure enough, much to nobody's surprise, high school students eventually, and middle school students eventually started trying the product. And the combination of the marketing and the highly addictive nature of the product really allowed this product, or facilitated the spread of this product across America and high schools and middle schools.
Right.
So now you have millions of people addicted to it.
And be sure to check out the magazine this week. We've got another e-cigarette story. It's about a former top scientist at Joule who wants to bring vaping to China and aims to help 1 billion smokers kick cigarettes with her new endeavor. And that endeavor is called Mist.
And we should give you a disclaimer. Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg Television and Radio, he has campaigned and given money in support of a ban on flavored e-cigarettes and tobacco.
Coming up, the world's most valuable company is finally set to IPO, but is Aramco worth the hype?
Plus, another unintended consequence of the U.S.-China trade war, a lost generation of tech workers. This is Bloomberg BusinessWeek. Welcome back to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Jason Kelly.
And I'm Carol Massar. You can also listen to us on the radio on Sirius XM Channel 119 and on AM 1130 in New York, 106.1 in Boston, 99.1 FM in Washington, D.C.
AM 960 in the Bay Area, in London on DAB Digital, and through the Bloomberg Business app. So let's turn now to the business section and Aramco's mega IPO. We've been talking a lot about this over the last couple of years. And that's because after several false starts, the public offering of Saudi Arabia's Crown Joule, this is a company that pumps 10% of global crude oil supply from fields under the desert. Well, that IPO is finally going ahead.
That's right, Jason. And the board is expected to give the green light for the world's biggest IPO next week. But will it live up to the hype? Here's reporter Will Kennedy joining us from London.
This was first suggested by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia back in 2016, and he stunned the world actually when he announced it by saying that this company, Saudi Aramco, which had been part of the Saudi state for decades, he was going to do an IPO and raise billions of dollars and bring it to global scrutiny and open up its finances. Then it went away for a while. They had been talking about a listing in London or New York, but investors bought really at the valuation the Crown Prince had put on the company of $2 trillion, which is, as you know, double what either the Microsoft or Apple, currently the world's two largest companies, are worth. All of a sudden it's come back. But it's come back in a slightly different form. It's going to be listed in Riyadh only. They're going to sell 1 or 2% of the company. And it seems that they've got the backing of some of Saudi Arabia's richest people, richest families. And at the moment, they think they can get that $2 trillion valuation.
Well, that's what I think is also interesting. First of all, in terms of the listing, Will, it's not like it's New York, it's not London, it's not Hong Kong. They're doing it on the Saudi exchange. And I do feel like even though it's going public, the Saudi government will still have a lot of oversight here.
That's exactly right. I mean, the rules on transparency are not quite the same as they would have been in New York, for example. I'll give you one example of that. In New York, SEC regulations mean you have to be very precise on your oil reserves as an oil company, how much is ready to drill now, how much might be ready to drill in the near future, and how much is still pretty speculative. They won't have to do that, for example, listing in Riyadh. They will be able to encourage Saudi banks to lend to potential investors, both large and small. And the Saudi government actually has a history of when there's an IPO in Riyadh, it tends to encourage some intervention in the market to ensure that the price stays buoyant. So it's not quite like an IPO would have been in New York or London. But it's still a very, very big exercise, and they will be marketing the equity outside Riyadh to international investors who want to come in through that mechanism. There'll be a 144A mechanism in New York, for example. So it will be there for international investors, but it's not the same as a New York listing, Carol.
Well, and when you go back and think about where the world was in 2016, what the world thought of Saudi Arabia's place in the global economy and the global political scene, well, that's changed pretty dramatically, not just for Saudi Arabia, but specifically for Aramco. Was targeted by some Iranian-made strikes, missile strikes, not too long ago. How has that changed the perception of this deal?
This is a world-class oil company, and operationally it's probably on a par with Exxon or Shell. But it operates, Jason, in a wholly different political situation, and we see that in several ways. This attack from a drone strike, people aren't sure exactly what it was, a missile strike, showed the very vulnerability of the Saudi energy system and the fact that it's in the world's most dangerous neighborhood, and that's going to presumably encourage investors to perhaps apply some kind of discount. And then you've got the political risk associated with Saudi Arabia that was illustrated by the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So investors are going to have to take those things into account when they assess the IPO for sure.
So we move from a mega-sized IPO to a medium-sized cloud company. We're talking about Box.
That's right, Box, and it's stuck in a sales rut. And the question is, can it escape the curse of the Silicon Valley mid-cap? Here's reporter Nico Grant in San Francisco.
Box is really a confounding company in some ways because it was founded about 14 years ago, and its founder, Aaron Levie, became something of a boy wonder here in Silicon Valley. He was called the future of enterprise technology, and there was so much promise for his company, which, was a very well-regarded tool for transferring files. And what happened is that the company grew among businesses. It decided to focus on business customers rather than consumers, like Dropbox, a slightly younger company. And then it just kind of saw itself start to fall in terms of the growth rates. It would not be able to meet the metrics that it had expected. It would, reduce the revenue forecasts. It was deeply unprofitable. Investors were concerned. Investors, ultimately let this stock and market cap fall. Box is in an unfortunate place of being unprofitable right now, but also having falling revenue growth. A company of this size, which has about 700 million in revenue a year in the cloud business, many of them are growing, above 20% or above 30% a quarter, and Box is in the very low double digits. And so Starboard, an activist investor, disclosed a major stake, one of the largest holders of the company. And now Aaron Levie is facing one of the biggest challenges of his career.
This guy eats, lives, sleeps. I mean, he puts in a lot of effort, but the point is maybe that's just not enough. Maybe this isn't what the company needs. Maybe it needs somebody else at the helm.
Aaron Levie told me that he feels right now like he needs to deliver. He doesn't get too drawn into the possibilities of what might happen, of him losing control. But of course, it is a possibility. Starboard has exhibited before that when it is unhappy with a board or when it is unhappy with management, it does seek changes and removals.
And we're going to stay in the technology section for just a moment because we've got a story about a generation of Chinese tech workers that is confronting a new reality.
Well, China's broader economic slowdown and the trade war with the U.S., they've ended the investment boom. That, of course, gave birth to heavyweights like Alibaba and Tencent. It's a really interesting story. Here's editor Rebecca Penty.
There's been a boom in recent years of financing of these big tech companies, which started out as startups, and that boom has ended, and that's because of slowing economic growth in China, a trade war with the US, which, as you know, has targeted one of Chinese biggest success stories, which is Huawei, a big tech company. So what's happening is financing is drying up, and that means layoffs for workers. So workers who've put in years of their lives at these tech companies, they work in a so-called 996 culture, which means they're expected to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. plus overtime 6 days a week. And that has come with a tacit agreement that they make a lot of money, that they get promoted, they become rich, they get stock in these companies. A lot of these people are getting laid off now and are, really confronting this new reality that, the tech boom has dried up.
Well, and Rebecca, tell us about 996 because it's a clever way of describing what really was a way of life and a way of life that was lauded by some of the best known entrepreneurs there in China.
That's right. So, earlier this year, a group of programmers, coders, took to GitHub, which is a popular site in China, and started protesting against 996. Their hopes and dreams were dashed. They weren't getting the payoff that they had long expected. And keep in mind that this is different than Silicon Valley. Yes, people work very hard in the US, but it really was an expectation that you would work 6 days a week and 12 hours a day or more. So they took to this site and protested against 996, started listing employers who were abusing them in terms of their, worker standards, not getting paid, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, spoke out to his own employees and to others and said, 996 is great. And so you're seeing some of that, old school mentality fight back against this worker revolt.
Coming up, Tesla's autopilot puts ethics in the fast lane.
This is Bloomberg BusinessWeek.
Welcome back to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Carol Massar.
And I'm Jason Kelly. Still ahead, Andrea Ely on leading the global coffee empire started by his grandfather in Italy.
Plus champagne, fur, and caviar. Snow Polo brings the jet set to a frozen lake in Switzerland.
But let's begin with our cover story. Tesla aiming to dominate the global auto market by building the world's first self-driving car considers autopilot to be the crucial first step.
Elon Musk's decision to put autopilot in the hands of as many people as possible, well, it amounts to an enormous experiment that's playing out on freeways all over the world. The question is, what's the acceptable bar when it comes to lives saved and lives lost? Here's reporter Zach Miter.
A lot of companies are trying to build driverless cars, and the promise is that, set aside all the other good things that might come with driverless technology, it has the potential to save a ton of lives. Something like 38,000 people die every year. Just in the United States, more than 1 million globally. And most of those fatalities are caused by human error of one kind or another. So if you can somehow keep the cars but remove the human error, there's just massive life-saving potential.
Well, and that's the predicament, right? That in order to get to that point, unfortunately, we're going to see some accidents as people continue to test autopilots, correct? Because they need the data to get better.
Well, so Tesla is taking an approach that's totally different from everyone else in the autonomous industry. Almost everyone else is basically saying, we have to be really careful about safety. We're going to try to build an autonomous car that works autonomously before we really start producing it in large quantities and selling it to people. And we have to sort of get it perfect or almost perfect before, because otherwise the concern is the public is going to react. They're going to freak out. They're going to ban these things. It could be a big problem.
And then there's Tesla.
Tesla's taking the total opposite approach, which is saying, listen, we don't have autonomous technology yet, but we have this stuff that's pretty good. You have to oversee it. It might sometimes make mistakes, but we'll just sell it. We'll put it in the cars and we'll tell the customers, you have to oversee this thing at all times. You have to constantly supervise it. It only works on highways, basically, but it works pretty well on highways. You can, without touching a pedal or the steering wheel, you can drive for 100 miles.
You got in a car, correct?
That's right.
And
what was it like?
Yeah, walk us through that.
It's creepy, you know? It's a creepy feeling. It's very different from cruise control because it's doing all this stuff without you. And you get to see kind of what the car sees, right? So you have a little video camera, or a video screen that shows you, if you drive along and there's a bicyclist in front of you, it shows an icon of a bicyclist. It's recognizing somebody on a bike, or it's recognizing a truck, or it's recognizing a car. And it's making decisions about what these other objects are going to do, where the road is, and it's driving.
And so Tesla's approach, just so we totally understand it, is this notion that they think you need a certain amount of data that can only really be captured in real life situations. What's their approach here? Help me understand it.
Their approach is essentially, they think that to get to a fully driverless car, rather than kind of keep it in the lab and perfect it and get it right, they're going to put something that needs human supervision into a car they can sell for money.
Right.
And get hundreds of thousands of them on the road. So there's more than 500,000 of these cars out there today that you can use autopilot on. And the theory is it's a little bit like the Google search engine,
right,
which kind of gets smarter every time you search on it because it sees how well it did in giving you the right search result. Tesla claims that they're doing a similar thing with their cars, that they're actually collecting data from all these cars. And they claim that will allow their software to improve faster than the competition, because the competition, the other companies developing autonomous vehicles are doing it mostly. They got 100 test cars, 600 test cars there. Tesla's got hundreds of thousands on the road.
I have to say, one data point stood out for me, Zach. Tesla customers have logged more than 1.5 billion miles on autopilot, right? And they're often pushing the limits, even though Tesla says, you have to be aware, you have to be, in control at all times. We've seen the stories of people doing other things while driving their Tesla. But at the same time, Tesla takes that data, right? And they can continue to refine the software and then spit out upgrades, right, to these cars. I mean, this is kind of a constant loop that is going on.
Self-learning.
Yeah.
That's the theory, right? But this is also a company that up until very recently
You sound skeptical.
I think we have to be skeptical of all these companies and try to kick the tires, as it were, about what they're claiming. And it may just be a coincidence, but Tesla until recently was telling everyone that it was going to become super profitable by selling by building the first kind of mass market electric car and selling those. It's building the first mass market electric car, the Model 3, but it's not profitable yet. And so now the focus is kind of in this new direction we're going to get to autonomy first. We need more time from investors, more.
Well, what about its safety record? What do we know about that? Because if this is what everybody's concerned about, and if Tesla's saying, "Hey, listen, we know the way to do it by throwing a ton of cars on the road," what is their safety record?
Right. So you would think that you would think that it would be relatively easy to tell because there's so many miles that they've already got under their belt. And Tesla has, of course, such good data about what all these cars are doing. It's constantly talking to all these cars. But it's actually a mystery to outsiders exactly how dangerous this technology is. Regulators have basically, up until now, not taken any action. They opened a defect investigation that closed without, ordering a recall or forcing Tesla to make any changes. But it's actually quite hard to figure out how safe these cars are. And the kind of positive case is that Tesla says, look, humans are always supervising these cars. So you have all the safety of a human driver. It's just that the car is doing things to help you, right? Almost like anti-lock brakes or something. It's just an additive safety feature. But the skeptical case says when you take so much responsibility away from the driver, they get lulled into a sense of complacency and they get distracted. It's actually very difficult to pay attention to supervising a system that appears to be working perfectly well on its own.
We want to bring in Bloomberg's Kelly Lyons. She's got more on our cover story, Tesla.
Well, and specifically breaking down the number of Teslas that are out there. Autopilot, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. The vast majority of the Teslas that have been delivered so far do have some kind of autopilot hardware. If you take a look, nearly 700,000 of those cars are on the road. Only 49,000 of them don't have any autopilot software whatsoever. That number has basically been level since the first version of autopilot was introduced back in 2015. You now have 100,000 that have that first version and more than 520,000 that have version 2 plus. In aggregate, all of the autopilot cars have driven about 1.5 billion miles on the road, and the company's data says that the crash rate is pretty low, but as we know, context matters a lot when we talk about those accidents.
Well, we're missing really the full safety record at Tesla. That's one of the points of Zach's story. Kelly, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kelly Lyons. Well, still ahead, Andrea Ely, chairman of the 86-year-old global coffee empire. We talked to him about tradition and innovation.
Plus, the new skier's paradise. You're going to want to check this out. This is Bloomberg BusinessWeek. Welcome back to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Jason Kelly.
And I'm Carol Massar. Join us for Bloomberg BusinessWeek every day on the radio, starting at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. You can also catch up on our daily show by checking out our podcast. Find that at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at Bloomberg.com.
And you can also find us online at businessweek.com, as well as through our mobile app.
We turn now to a Bloomberg BusinessWeek debrief. Andrea Ely is leading the global coffee empire started by his grandfather 86 years ago in Italy.
What a history. Well, he wants to double Ely Cafe's revenue in under 10 years, but do it sustainably. He sat down with BusinessWeek editor Joule Weber in London.
All business, more or less, start family. So it's then it depends if you stay family or you go public. And you typically go public one day, either because the family wants to withdraw or because you need to raise some equity or something went wrong. I mean, the company has been sold, etc. So I think that if the family is good at managing the business, it can preserve control of the company for forever, possibly. There are businesses with 10 of different generations still being private. There is even one world association which is called Enochian, which you need to be minimum 2 centuries old to become part of this Enochian family business community.
So you still have some work to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's feasible. And
so when you think about how you do business and how other businesses could learn from you, what metrics do you think good business should use to measure performance?
Well, I said in a sense before, responsibility besides performance. And performance is about the value that you create. I was quite surprised this summer to see how this CEO declaration has been received, the skepticism and also, I would say, misinformation with which it was received. Because it seemed to listen very old-fashioned argumentation about supporting the theory of shareholder value. But if we consider shareholder value is about increasing, first of all, value, not profits. It's a totally different story. Value is the net present value. Is how much cash flow are you generating over time, 10 years, 20 years. So the net present value you are going to generate depends on the cash flow you are going to generate in this long period ahead. And the second variable involved is the cost of money. So let's make this parallel with sustainability. If you are not sustainable in the business, then you will have a reputational damage, which will make you sell less, because consumers buy less from, let's say, low reputation businesses. If you are not sustainable, you are going to have higher costs, because you have liabilities and then you have to pay liabilities. So you are going to diminish your cash flow. If you have an unsustainable business, you are going to be more risky. So your cost of money is going to be higher. So you have both on the denominator and numerator factors which are worsening your net present value. So it's a completely nonsense to talk about profits or shareholder value without considering sustainability as a main value creator. And this was not written in the press. And I was surprised because if you do a finance course, you learn it immediately.
So Illy has a grand tradition of innovation. What do you think the next big thing in coffee might be?
Well, in coffee, I really hope that we will be able to give a substantial contribution to virtuous agriculture. This is why I'm studying it. Enriching the soil with organic carbon, making, thanks to that, making better coffee, more resilience to climate change, and showing the way to the rest of agriculture that this is feasible and with very good results.
Up next, the Sport of Kings, talking about polo, but with a twist, this time on ice.
Sounds like fun, I think. Plus, no more Michelin Man. We try on scaled back puffer coats. We had some fun.
We did. We looked great. This is Bloomberg BusinessWeek.
Welcome back to Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm Carol Massar.
And I'm Jason Kelly. You can also listen to us on the radio through Sirius XM channel 119, also AM 1130 in New York, 1061 in Boston, 99.1 FM in Washington, D.C.
AM 960 in the Bay Area, in London on DAB Digital, and of course on the Bloomberg Business app. Return now to this week's Pursuits section, where it's all about posh winter places and puffer coats.
Editor Chris Rouser kicks it off with playing polo on ice.
One of the best, most crazy events during the winter around the world is the annual snow polo in St. Moritz. And it happens after Davos. And so a lot of people just hop in their private jets and go there. And it's sponsored by NetJets and Maserati and some other really luxury companies. And it's just a 3-day weekend. It's a polo tournament. They clear off the ice and they play polo all weekend. And it's champagne and fur and parties and bling, the whole thing.
It sounds so decadent.
It's really over the top. It's the first time, and we cover luxury, and I had not heard of what they call a caviar bump, which is when they spoon caviar directly onto your fist for you to eat it that way. Which, caviar on flesh is a thing, but I had not.
It's like an upscale frat party.
It's like you can get beers and bratwurst, or you can have somebody put some caviar right in your hand.
It's not just for the ultra decadent wealthy. Like you can actually go as a regular.
Yeah, so it's one of the spots on sort of the global ultra high net worth calendar, but what they're trying to do is also make it accessible to anybody. So you can actually go, and if you're there, you're a local, you live nearby, you can go for free actually, although tickets in the grandstands can cost up to almost 700 Swiss francs. But yeah, you can go get a beer and just sort of watch this crazy sport of kings.
If you're not doing that, you're probably thinking about skiing, and everybody's always looking for the next place. Zermatt is so 2018.
Yeah,
I guess. So what's the new place?
Last year. So there is this place that's been in development since about 2007 called Andermatt, which is actually quite an old resort, but it kind of fell out of use by most people in the 80s, and it used to have a military base, and then the military base closed in the 90s, and so it kind of became very sleepy. And then this Egyptian billionaire named Sami Sawiris actually looked at the place and was like, you know what, I could develop this. This has all the bones of an amazing resort. So he developed a hotel, the Hotel Chedi. He built a golf course, and actually he got a special dispensation to allow foreigners to buy second homes there, which you can't actually really do in Switzerland. And so basically over the past few years, it's become more and more of an international destination. And of course, it's a cute old Swiss town, so it's got all the charm that you want of a kind of like Chamonix, that kind of thing. But it's actually kind of untouched, and now they're replacing all the old lifts with gondolas and stuff, and it's really an amazing place.
And it's big.
Yeah, it's really big, and they're actually connecting more mountains with gondolas and stuff, so you can actually connect to other resorts too.
Yeah, because it says the interconnected ski area, ultimately 180 kilometers, 112 miles of slopes, and 33 lifts. And just by way of comparison, that's 2 more lifts than Vail.
Yeah, exactly. Don't tell Vail.
And some pretty cool hotels and places to stay.
Yeah, so there's the Chedi, which is actually a small chain, and it's quite big and glamorous and new. But then there's some old ones like the Hotel Saône, which have been around for a while, and there, even though the Chedi is kind of the big new thing, all the hotels are pretty psyched because a lot more people are coming now.
Well, and we should point out, not all the locals are thrilled, it sounds like, because this was kind of one of those throwback places, well-hidden sort of secret gem for the locals and people who knew it, and now it's all commercial.
Yeah, that's the story of a lot of these ski resorts, right? Like Whistler, now everyone's worried it's going corporate. They're all charming, they're all independent, and then as they get bigger, it's good for a lot of the businesses, but then it does lose some of the character.
All right, so speaking of characters, the puffer coat.
Yes.
Kind of getting a bit of a makeover, right? I think of puffer coats, and you just feel like the Michelin Man, right?
Yeah, like people in New York City bouncing off of each other during the winter time.
But you
make it fancy.
You guys have some nice versions.
So the question when it gets to winter and style that we get asked the most is what is a cute puffer coat, which is kind of an oxymoron, and also one
the newsroom goes silent.
Right. Well, one that doesn't look this like a Canada Goose. They kind of all look the same. They're gray, they're blue, they're black, and they have that same look. So we went out and tried to find some other puffer coats that don't look the same and that are sort of trim and tailored. So we found a few, and I brought some in case you guys want to try
Please show us. And we're going to try and describe them for radio.
Yes.
And for those folks on radio, please go to Bloomberg.com or buy the magazine, check it out so you can really see the pictures.
So one of my favorites is by this brand called Perfect Moment, and it's $490, and it's got this herringbone, red and blue and white.
It's like digital.
Pattern.
I'm trying this on.
Yeah.
It's like digital herringbone.
It's cute.
So
it's very short though. I noticed that in the picture. So
that's
it's almost
because you got jeans on.
So you will
ski pants.
If you're going to ski, you wear ski pants with the bib.
Yes.
The ones that go up the top. And then one of my favorite new brands is called Aztec Mountain. They actually have.
I like this one.
The designer from Mugler is also, which is a very fancy fashion brand. They also have.
That's a Jason kind of coat.
Yeah, this is.
Are these
dark.
Unisex? Or are these is this?
The one you're wearing, the Perfect Moment one, is for women.
Okay.
And then Jason, they have for men and women.
I like this.
Oh, look at that little
it's
yoga.
Got the little
yoga hands.
Little elastics that cover your hands. And
so Jason's is all blue, and that's $750.
Yeah,
Mine
Jason's
is about $500.
technical, like a puffer, but like more hardcore. And and that's called the Nuke suit, and that's $1,600.
This is on brand.
It's totally on brand for you.
And then I have one from a brand called Mammut, which is $800, and it is the blingiest, goldest thing.
Wow. Are you going to put it on?
Ever see? I'm going to put it on.
Oh my God, it's going over. All right, for everybody on radio, Chris is putting it over.
Wow.
Oh
So
my
it's not.
God.
We're not going to
It's
lose
for
you.
everyone.
Yeah.
But it's definitely.
Looks good.
Yeah, and it's so warm. The second you put it on, you're like, this is warm. And it
Kind
has
of like a
vents
solar
on
panel,
the
too.
side. Yeah. And
That's
and this is
$800, right?
$800. Yeah, so this is kind of in the range of a normal kind of, if you're wearing a nice winter coat, it's going to cost you about $700.
I feel like you're seeing a lot more puffer coats, but they're stylish, right?
Yeah, and brands like Tory Burch, Saint Laurent, like kind of non-ski brands are getting into this because they know that people want something that looks nice and looks kind of different, and a lot of them are really cute.
Well, and as you say, sort of, cut in a slightly different way. Of course, this took us back to the previous season and the towel tuxedo.
You bring us all the best jackets.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yes,
God!
right. Yeah,
I told you to get a picture of this.
Yeah.
Right, the Terry tuxedo jacket.
Yeah, the beach blazer.
The
Kinda
beach
love
the
blazer.
winter version of the beach
It
blazer.
really is. But I mean, but the sort of the tailoring and because everybody
They're laughing at us
when
outside the
studio. When you go to like a ski shop or whatever, everything you try on is just you're kind of walking around like the Michelin Man.
But you do see a lot of, like, for women, especially like crop jackets and so on and so forth. They're still warm, right?
Yeah.
But they're not so
But
big.
but with that, you would have to wear a ski bib. Like you couldn't just wear your fancy little ski pants.
Well, and Aztec Mountain, who makes the ones that Jason's wearing, their thing is like, we know that we have people that want technical coats, but a lot of people want something just to walk around in. Because how often are you actually skiing, right? Like versus how often are you walking around in New York where you're outside and you're actually really cold?
Right.
Bloomberg BusinessWeek is available on newsstands now.
And also online at businessweek.com and on our mobile app.
Gotta ask you, what's your must read?
My must read is Joule, but only because I feel like there was so much we didn't know about the origins of Joule, and this story, deep dive, lays it all out. Your must read?
It's a really good piece. I am not gonna have a must read this week because I have sort of a must give gift to celebrate you and your 20th anniversary at Bloomberg. In my role as bureau chief and your co-host, I hereby present you with your 20th anniversary.
Oh my God, this
pylon.
is so lovely. I was wondering where my block was. I have to say, 20 years, I've loved Bloomberg, and mostly because of the people that are here. They're just amazing. Just love it.
All right, well, check out our Daily Business Week podcast. It's available at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at Bloomberg.com.
I love this. More Bloomberg Television starts now.